Toussaint, and the title of my presentation is My Journey to Escape Disorder. And I have, Mike did a great job earlier talking about the Cynefin framework, and he talked about this idea of disorder. So the Cynefin framework is something that is kind of complicated or complex or hard to understand first pass. So I have a short video that I wanted to show just to refresh on that framework, which I'll be talking through to some level, and then really kind of focus in on this concept of disorder.
Hi there, it's Sean from Informatica here. I just thought I'd give you a quick overview of the Cynefin framework. It's really one of the most useful frameworks, I would say, in my kit bag, talking to people about how to use stories in organisations and why you actually use stories and storytelling. This is how it goes. So the framework is really made up of 4 domains, and these domains describe how things happen in an organisation. And so the first domain is the simple domain on the bottom right-hand corner, and this is where the cause and effect relationship is very well known. So if you do X, you always get Y. No matter how many times you do X, you get the right answer, you get the same answer. It's sort of like turning the handle on a sausage machine, you know what the result is going to be. In this domain, sort of things that work for you are standard operating procedures, best practice, and you end up knowing that you're going to have one or a few good answers. The next domain is the complicated domain, and again there's a relationship between cause and effect, but you've got to put some effort into working out the relationship. You've got to do some analysis, you've got to work out what the possibilities are. So this is really about analysis. It's about the expert mindset. It's about people putting that effort in. And in fact, these experts who work out these relationships tend to be, in so many cases, the most conservative people in the organisation because they put the effort into that, working out what those combinations are, what those possibilities are. Now, the area that I guess I've been interested in for some time is this next domain, which is the complex domain. And this is where the cause and effect relationship is so intertwined that things only make sense in hindsight. So when something happens, everyone goes, oh, well, the reason why that happened is because of X, Y, and Z. But if you were to rewind the tape and play it again, you'd actually get a different outcome. Rewind, play, another outcome. And the reason for this is in the complex space, it's all about a network that's connected together. And where the relationships are non-linear, so a small activity in one part of the network can have a big impact somewhere else, and vice versa. And in the complex space, things are unpredictable in detail. And so the way you make progress in the complex space is to sense the patterns that are there. It's never complete. The sort of things that you are dealing with in the complex space are things like culture and innovation, leadership and trust, all those messy people things. Now the thing is, up until fairly recently, we've been dealing with those issues as if they were simple or complicated, using that sort of mindset and approach. Now once we recognise that they're complex, we can start using different tools, different ways of understanding, different ways to make sense. And this is where stories are very important, because stories help us see patterns. They help us see the messiness that's going on in the organisation. And the last domain is chaotic. And the chaotic is where there's no sequential relationship between cause and effect. And really, the chaotic, the thing you need to do is take action. You just got to do something. It doesn't really matter what. It will push you into one of the other domains, and then depending on where you end up, will help you decide what the next steps are. So that's a quick overview of the Cynefin framework. I recommend you check out the references for Cynefin, which have been developed by Toussaint.
All right, so that's another quick refresher crash course on the Cynefin framework. And in the video, well, Mike earlier talked about this 5th space, this disorder space. And in the video, it doesn't really talk about that space. I wanted to spend some time and talk about that space in particular, because I think we don't spend a lot of time talking about this. We like to think about, like the theory of is it complex or complicated or simple. And the reality is that most of the time we're in disorder. And so I wanted to tell a story of kind of my journey through my career and education and kind of relaying some of those experiences to this framework, explaining what it feels like and looks like to be constantly living in disorder, because I was constantly living in disorder, and sort of what that journey was for me to get out of disorder. And so we all have some predisposition of where we feel comfortable. So as a young, this is me as a young boy, we're all born into disorder. We're all born and we tend to just go to where we feel best. So as a young kid, I was very much into Legos. I liked trying to figure out how things worked. I was kind of oblivious to everything around me, as you can probably see here. And that I had all the books on my shelf of how do things work. I also like to play music. But I think if I were to boil down my predisposition, it was really understanding how things worked was more about the cause and effect for me, right? And so when became time to choose a major for college, I thought, okay, science is where I'm at. I love science. I decided to study physics in undergraduate school. And the key question that had been burning my whole life was, how does the universe work? And physics seemed like a good place to learn that. And what physics taught me in college, and I went to school here at Lawrence, I was in the physics department here at Lawrence, is that everything is an equation. The whole universe can be described with an equation, with equations. And I loved that. And that was because living in disorder, my natural tendency was to push towards the complicated domain. That was where I felt most comfortable. And so when I learned this, I was like, oh, that's great. Everything's an equation. I can, if I just know all the variables, and I can determine the value of those variables, and I know the law of physics or the equation, I can predict the future. And that thinking started to trickle into other aspects of my education. I remember I had a religious studies course that I took where I wrote a paper saying that, it was not very popular in the class, saying that all bad things that have happened in human history are a result of emotional decision making. So if we want to remove the bad things from happening in our world, we just need to use pure logic when we make decisions and remove emotions from the equation. So that was an example of how that thinking started to trickle into other aspects of it. And it was more of a thought experiment, really, but it kind of something like Meanwhile, while I was in college, I was continuing to play music, and I started a band. And by the time I graduated, I felt pretty good about what I'd learned about this question. How does the universe work? It was like, man, I learned general relativity. I know how to describe black holes with equations. I kind of felt like I scratched that itch. And so when it came time for my next phase after college, I was like, oh, maybe I should depart from that and we'll try the music thing. So my next phase of life was moving to Chicago with the band that we formed and having a go at it, trying to make it. And so the key question shifted from how does the universe work to how do you grow a fan base and make a living selling and performing music? So I moved to Chicago. I got a job working at a cafe so I could pay rent. And I began applying my problem-solving methods to that question. So I'd learned a whole set of tools and thinking around complicated space, closed system, physics problem solving, right? And I was like, all right, so I need to identify the variables. I need to figure out what the value of those variables are. I need to understand the laws of physics that are governing this situation, and then I can win, because if I know all those things, I can predict the outcomes. And obviously that was a pretty futile effort. The music industry is extremely complex. The product and services and experiences that are being sold are very subjective. And it's a big network of people, very, very complex space. But I was in disorder. And so my tendency was to just move to treat it as if I was in a complicated space. 2 years of this go by, I am very frustrated. And I was starting to just not be fulfilled in my life doing this, living in this space and trying to answer this question. And so I wanted to move back to something that felt good, that felt comfortable, that felt like was going to challenge me analytically. I wanted a I wanted to work on a mechanism, a machine, something that had cause and effect relationships in a complicated space where I could have control over my environment around me. And so that's what led me to Six Sigma, that desire. And I took a class in Six Sigma, thought maybe this is the next thing I could try. And I was like, great, this is amazing. I love the DMAIC framework. It was all statistical process analysis. It felt very controlled, very variable driven, very equation driven. And I met a man in that class that I took that invited me to come out and do an internship in Boston, at Boston Children's Hospital, where my key question in that internship was, how do you define how clean a hospital is? I was no longer trying to make it in the music industry. I was trying to figure out how to define cleanliness in a hospital. So as a responsible Six Sigma practitioner, I got out my notebook and I was like, all right, we need to make operational definitions. And I had a whole process of how to do that. And we need to define what cleanliness is. We need to define different levels of cleanliness, what rooms need to be at what levels of cleanliness, and how do we create a system and a process that we can use to create those definitions to help us make the hospital clean. And that felt so good to me to do that work. It was fit very neatly in this complicated box. And looking back in retrospect, I think my manager who I was reporting to was running all the complex space interference so that I could just stay in my lane and do my little definition work. But through that time, I was thinking, oh, this is amazing. I love this. This is for me. It fits into this. I feel like I have control of the environment around me. And so I'm all in. I'm committed. When my internship ended, I made a move to a seemingly related field. I joined the lean department at a medical group out in Boston, and my future wife helped me drive across the country, and I moved to Boston. And the question then in that role, we were working on a lot of different questions, but one of the main questions was this: how do you improve patient flow in a clinic? And as a part of that department, I started to learn a whole new set of tools and thinking, and which was a little bit misleading because the tools that I was learning were all suggesting that we would be able to have control over the environment around us. The process mapping, the success, the spaghetti diagrams, the standard work, the takt time demand, understanding demand and takt time. And so we came in and we have all these tools to work in a clinic setting. And it was the first time that I really got my heavy dose of the social side of change. And really working through some organizational dynamics, issues and problems that came up when we were working with the departments to try to make these changes. But we were still in disorder. We were still not really sensing the complexity and distinguishing those cause and effect, the difference in the cause and effect relationships. So we started applying our tool set to those challenges, to the complex challenges. We started saying, we need detailed standard work for how to spread our improvements across the system. We need takt time-based agendas to discuss complex problems that required open-ended dialogue. We wanted to use process tools to approach culture change. And that caused the team to get extremely, extremely frustrated. And it caused everyone that was working with our team to get extremely frustrated because we were being so rigid to a complicated tool set trying to solve a complex problem because we were living in disorder. The last experience I'll talk about is this. In the same organization I worked at, I was on that lean team, and then I got asked to be a part of this pilot group that we were going to experiment with design thinking and lean product development to try to answer this question. How do you obsolete the current model of care delivery? So it was before we were improving on what existed. This group the challenge was, let's blow it up. And what if we redesign from the ground up? What's that process look like? And this is about the time when I discovered this framework, this Cynefin framework. And I must say it came at a very, very timely point, moving into this innovation space. And for me, this was a really, really big moment to discover this because as someone who naturally tends to complicate it, I wanted an equation. I wanted to understand variables. This was like an equation that helped explain why equations wouldn't work. And so that was really important, and it was also really timely in terms of the innovation work, because in innovation you're dealing with building something new that doesn't exist yet. There's no past data to analyze, so analysis does not work, analysis is one of the primary tools in the complicated space. The performance metrics that you need to identify in innovation need to emerge over time as you learn what winning means, because it hasn't been defined yet. So it's all very complex in its nature. And I was beginning to escape disorder and beginning to understand this complexity, which was really, really helpful for me. So for me, this journey was really about moving and understanding the difference between the complicated space and the complex space. And that's just because my natural disposition, or I tended to want to live in a complicated space, and I think we all tend to want to live in one of these spaces. And I'm still on my journey, but I think for me personally, this quote sums up the shift that I needed to make. We tend to prefer the image of the leader on the charging stallion to that of the sailor trying to navigate stormy seas. The leader on the stallion seems to be in control of his destiny, while the sailor has no chance of controlling the stormy sea. Instead, the sailor needs to be adept at reading the weather, understanding the patterns, and reacting to changes, and adjusting his sails. So that was my needing to let go of the idea that I can control the environment around me. And so I think we all have different paths that we take in terms of getting comfortable in different domains. So I guess I pose the question, what domain do you tend to feel most comfortable in? Are you living in disorder? And if so, what might you need to do to become more comfortable in the other domains? That's all I have to say. Thank you.